Hey guys, Jack, welcome back. And with the January transfer window, a lot of clubs will be wanting to make moves, particularly bringing players in to try help them maybe achieve the title, top four, Europe, or just survive relegation. But a lot of these, every club really has a few players that probably they want to get rid of, either to generate value or just to get rid of a toxic player. The key stipulation I'm going to have with this video is that these players are going to be sold. There's not going to be a loan to option to buy. They're going to be purely sold, and this is down to my opinion. And while there's a lot of players that you kind of would presume that would definitely be sold, or they seem like they're going to be getting sold, like for me, I want to try find a few players that are a bit under the radar in their clubs. This video is inspired by James Lawrence Alcott. He has a really good YouTube channel. It's just really insightful. So I'll be linking the video down in the description, and let's just jump into it. If you have any other ideas for players that should move on from their club, put it down in the comments, and it'd be really interesting to see what other people think of who maybe their players should leave. It'd just be really interesting to see. So we're going to start from the bottom and make our way up. So we're going to be talking about Sheffield United, and the first player we're going to be talking about is Brian Brewster, who signed from Liverpool in about 2021 and has never really settled in the squad. He obviously in the Premier League they struggled and ultimately went down, and even when they were in the Championship he just couldn't seem to fit into the squad. Obviously injuries has really affected him, but I think it just might be best for both parties just for him to move on. Swansea, he did incredibly well on loan in Swansea, and I think a move to the Championship will help revive his career. It's really a disappointment given the praise and the kind of hype that was around him, potentially becoming an England striker behind Harry Kane, but it just hasn't worked out yet. And I do think maybe just move down the divisions will help kind of restart his career and even make something of it. You've seen there's a couple of players at Burnley who could potentially move. The one I'm going to point out is Michael Obafemi, who Burnley did a lot to try sign last January. And he did as well to kind of force the move out. Obviously it became a loan from Swansea and then they bought him in the summer. But since then, I think he's only made 3 appearances so far this season, and he's an international striker for Ireland. And I think it'd just be really important that he, moves on, because clearly, despite having issues up front, they haven't really, relied on him. Amdouni, Zarawi, Jay Rodriguez, like they've all been playing ahead of him. So probably again, similar to Brewster, just move down the divisions just to kind of get some game time and potentially come back up. Luton's very tricky to pick one because I haven't watched them enough, and there isn't a lot of players that I could say that they should move on. But one player I kind of pointed out was Ryan Giles, who came from Wolves, who had a really good loan spell at Middlesbrough, and he was a left wing back, and I really thought he'd get a lot more game time because he is a very creative outlet. The problem is he's not a great defensive fullback. I think that's been an issue because Kabor on the right hand side has been kind of the key kind of attacking fullback. And I think on the left-hand side, you just kind of relied on Alfie Doty to just be the kind of, more stable player. And I think given his skill set, he'd do really well in the back five system as a flying wing back, especially on set pieces. And I thought that he'd be utilised a lot more with them. But that hasn't worked out. So I think just moving on to somewhere that'll play 5 in the back will really benefit him and his career. Everton are doing really well despite having the 10 points deduction, and they just sit outside the relegation zone. And one player I picked out was Ben Godfrey. He signed from Norwich from I think about 25 to 30 million pounds, and so far under Sean Dyche he's rarely featured, and I know a couple of injuries have really affected him, but I really thought he would be getting a bit more game time, especially a fullback, because with Nathan Patterson injured, Seamus Coleman's injury record not the best, I thought I'd get a lot more use down that right hand side, but that hasn't been the case. And I think given his performances at Norwich that warranted the move to Everton, and he did really well prior to his big injury, I think he deserves to be moving on to somewhere where he'll be played. He's a talented defender. He is relatively young. I think he could do something in the game, and I could see him potentially having a Premier League career, but it looks like it won't be at Everton. Brentford have a lot of injury issues, and it's mostly down to their attack, so there isn't anyone from that particular area that I'm pointing at. What I'm going to be looking at is Charlie Good, who is a 28-year-old English centre-back who hasn't featured at all this season. And I think he had an injury at the start of the season, but since then he hasn't featured. I think he wasn't even registered in the Premier League squad. And I think he's a capable centre-back. We saw that when Brentford first came up, while he wasn't the first name on the team sheet. He's very dependable, and I think he didn't play much in Blackpool due to injuries on loan last season, but he is a good player, and I think a Championship move would be ideal. I think his contract's up at the end of the season, but I think if Brentford can cash in now, get maybe a couple of mil for him, he'll be a very good centre-back for someone in the Championship, so we kind of have to wait and see what happens there. I was very tempted to put Andrew Amabama-Dele, who signed in the summer from Norwich, but because of his age and I presume Nottingham Forest will look to loan him, I'm going to go with Ethan Horvath. The US goalkeeper did really well at Luton last year, got 44 games, had 19 clean sheets. And I thought he played really well overall. He did have a couple of mistakes, but that was expected to happen. He did well towards the end of Nottingham Forest promotion campaign, and I thought he'd get more opportunities than he has. Being left out of the Premier League squad was not great, because he doesn't count towards their homegrown registration. So I think a move would probably be best for him. I think Forest can get a fee from him, and whether that'll be from the Championship, I don't believe. So MLS would probably be his best option. He'd be a top half goalkeeper in the division, and he's a US men's national team goalkeeper. He's called up on numerous occasions, and I think he has the ability to warrant being called back up again. So maybe a move back home to the States would be best for him. The player I've selected is Jairo Riedewald. Probably pronounced that wrong, but Frank de Boer signed him when he took over Palace in, I believe 2017. And after 4 games, de Boer left, and ever since then, Riedewald has never had a place in the first team, not a regular one anyway. And he came from Ajax and was relatively promising. I thought he'd move up, from Palace, but he never really got a solid footing in the squad. Injuries have really affected him, and I think just the transition between right back, centre back, and CDM has really affected him. He hasn't really solidified a place in the squad, and I think it'd just be best for him to move on, just to maybe return back to the Eredivisie and just kind of rekindle his career a bit, as he goes into his 30s, just to be a bit comfortable in his later years. A bit of a shout out to Rob Holding, who, despite signing in the summer, believing that he'll get more game time, hasn't been the case, and I don't know what's happened with him. So hopefully he finds a resolution someday. Fulham have done reasonably well this season. Obviously they've had a few dodgy patches, but overall they've done quite well. And while João Palhinha looks set to potentially leave in January, they don't really have many players that they can kind of easily dispose of. One player I think they could get something from, who'd be a valuable asset to them, is Adama Traore. And while he is a good option to have on the bench, he hasn't featured all that much. And I understand his final product isn't the best, but he is fast, he's strong, he is good on the ball. I think he could generate a bit of revenue for the club, and if they're going to be selling Palhinha for upwards of 40 to 50 million pounds, there is a lot of that they can do, and maybe get a let's say 10-15 mil for Adama Traore. That could really go a long way to revitalising the squad and helping them push up towards up the top of the table. Bournemouth have done really well in the last couple of months under Areola, and a bit like Fulham, they don't have a lot of players that they can really dispose of, but one player for Bournemouth I think that they can let go and generate some revenue is Gavin Kilkenny, young Irish central midfielder who had decent loan spells out with Stoke and Charlton, but I think fitness was an issue for him, and I think that's going to be the case here. He was really integral to them in their promotion push, and I'm surprised he hasn't kind of got more opportunities. I think it's a bit similar to Joe Rothwell. I think maybe a move back down to the Championship, and somewhere where he can just develop and just potentially have a good career in the EFL, or potentially even the Premier League. I think he has that capability, it's just that he needs the game time to showcase that. While Gary O'Neill has done well with a small squad, there is a couple of players that they could sell on. Obviously, Johnny is set to leave, having had a bust up in training. But one player I think that could generate a good bit of revenue is Yerson Mosquera, who had a really good season with FC Cincinnati in the MLS. He was part of a really strong defence that won the Supporters' Shield, and they got to the Conference League semi-final in their conference. I think he could be a really valuable asset to the squad, and I think they should use him, but considering that he's been out and he hasn't been playing under Gary O'Neill, I say he'd be a bit tentative to actually utilise him. So I wouldn't be surprised if he decides to ship him off and just generate a bit of value, because they're dealing with FFP regulations. Like Forest, Chelsea have a lot of players that they could sell on, and I think Todd Bowley is going to be looking to sell academy players. We've seen Conor Gallagher on news for potentially being let go, which is I think a ludicrous idea. But if they're going to be looking at academy players, I had to pick 2 here because there's just so many. Probably my primary target would be Ian Matson, who had a really, really good loan spell with Burnley last season as a flying wing back. And even though Pochettino really seems to like him, he hasn't featured all that much. And he hasn't featured at left back, which, that's his primary position. He's played really anywhere across the front line. And I think that kind of lack of consistent games, and lack of starts really affects him. And I think with his deal, I think up in the summer or next summer, they really need to get a move on if they want to sell him. Another player I want to talk about is Trevor Chalobah, who, although he's been injured, I think he probably sees that his career at Chelsea is nearly over. There's a lot of centre backs in waiting to come back in. So we have obviously Badiashile, Colwill, Dizazi, Thiago Silva, Fofana to come back from injury, and I think it'd probably be best for Chalobah to get a move. Apparently Bayern Munich were interested before. I don't think that's going to be the case now, but maybe a move to the Bundesliga or Ligue 1, where he had a really good spell with Lorient. And with Maatsen, maybe Eredivisie or a potential Europa League team, because he is really capable. It's just these two players need to find moves that will guarantee him first team football. Newcastle have been riddled by injuries, and it's mad how many they've had now in the last few weeks. And the one positions that they didn't really have a lot of injuries in has been right back. So Trippier and Livramento have kind of been sharing that spot, and that's kind of left Javier Manquillo out in the wilderness. And I think probably it would just be right for him to move on. I think his deal is up either this summer or next, and he's a solid right back. I don't think he's Premier League standard, but he can do a job. He did quite well under Rafa Benitez, but he just hasn't featured since Eddie Howe's come in. Obviously injuries have affected that, but he just hasn't featured. So returning home to Spain or somewhere else across Europe, he'd be a good mid-table fullback, and it'll be good for him just to kind of move on and kind of start afresh. Obviously with United, Jadon Sancho is the prime suspect to be sold, but it looks like Dortmund are going to be getting him on loan for the season, and I think just to generate revenue for him. So one of the players I think that United will sell, and I think just the player should try to leave permanently just for his sake of his career, is Facundo Pellistri. Now the young Uruguayan winger he's only 21, and he obviously is very highly thought of by the Uruguayan FA. Even Bielsa, who continually call him up for the squad despite not playing. He had a fine loan spell at Alaves, but they were going down regardless. And since he's come back, he hasn't featured regularly. And with Amad Diallo looking to come in and kind of take up that spot on the right, kind of alongside Anthony, I just think that Pellistri, for the sake of his own career, just to move on, United could generate some revenue for him, because he is a very talented, high potential winger. And I just think he's being wasted at the club. I really want him to prosper. I think he has the potential to be a not world class winger, but he'd be up there playing with Champions League clubs. And I think potentially moving somewhere in La Liga, maybe like Girona, Atletico, like he can do that. He can work hard. Obviously physically he's not built, but he is a good player. So I think he just needs to just move on from United, accept that Ten Hag isn't going to use him, and just prosper and move to Spain, where he can be a lot more comfortable. I just really hope he does figure out something either this January, just for the sake of his own career. Jakub Moder is the player I want to select for Brighton. He is a talented central midfielder from Poland, and unfortunately injuries have really stifled his development. Like, he was a talented player like maybe 2 or 3 years ago when he was making regular features off the bench, and he's done that again this season under De Zerbi, but I just think he just needs to move on and just get regular game time. I think he's a talented player, and I could see the Bundesliga being a good fit for him. Very energetic, good on the ball, really physically imposing. I think he looks a lot bigger than I think he is, and I just think just for him to move on would be good for him, and for Brighton to generate some some money from him. Maybe the Bundesliga is a bit too high intense for him, so maybe the Serie A, where there's a lot of Polish players who've done really well, like Zielinski and Jakub Blaszczykowski a few years back. There is a lot of players that work there, so maybe he can prosper in that league where it's a bit less intense, and he's kind of out of the limelight once again, and potentially get back into the Polish national team. David Moyes hasn't hidden the fact that Maxwell Cornet looks set to leave at some stage. Again, he did quite well for Burnley once he got fit before they were relegated, and since joining West Ham, injuries have been in effect. But this season, this hasn't been a good marriage, in all honesty, with him and Moyes. And Moyes has kind of inadvertently voices issues with him, so maybe it is an attitude problem. But I think given his ability, and he did quite well at Lyon, that I think he could get they can get a few million for him, and I'd say he'd do quite well either in Turkey or back in France, where he can just kind of rekindle his career and hopefully push the injury issues aside. Another player would be Connor Coventry, who was touted as going to be the next Mark Noble in terms of coming up through the academy and kind of sticking in the squad, but that hasn't worked out. And I think again a championship move for him would be really beneficial, just for him to restart his career, because he did really well at Stoke last season. Just hasn't really got a look in now with West Ham. With Eric Dyer's contract coming up now in the summer, I think it'd just be best for him to move on. He clearly is not favoured by Ange Postecoglou, and while he was kind of relied upon when they first had their injury crisis, looks like Postecoglou prefers to have either Ben Davies and Emerson Royale at centre back instead of him. So, and I think maybe the likes of Luton or another Premier League club like maybe Sheffield United or Everton could use him, because he's a dependable player, a good Premier League player. Just think maybe the level of Tottenham is kind of beyond him at this stage. I could see him returning back to Portugal because he qualifies as a homegrown player, and he'd be very useful in that league. Maybe return back to Sporting. Another player would be Brian Gill, who it just doesn't have seemed to work out for him. So just return to Spain and just kind of grow, develop, and just kind of get regular game time either way. If you see my videos, you know how much I love Aaron Ramsdale. I just think he's really good, just really nice lad. And he's, what more than anything, as a good goalkeeper, he's an incredible leader. While he isn't going to be the whole like Roy Keane, just scream abuse at you kind of thing, I just think he just leads by example. He did really well last season and kind of leading his side, leading his back line. And I think even off the pitch with his recent Players Tribute article about his brother, you can see he's very mature on his shoulders. And I understand that there's a bit of qualms with him kind of being a bit immature, but that's how he operates. And I think that's just how a lot of English goalkeepers operate. He is a character, and that's how he able to focus. I'm the same. I can't just focus strictly for 90 minutes. I kind of have to joke with myself, either with the crowd, not with the crowd. No, if there's a crowd of any matches I play, it's just a dog and some old man. But with him, that's kind of how he operates, and I think he could do really well with Newcastle, who are missing Pope, and they're going to need to move on from him at some stage. But I don't think Arsenal will sell him to Newcastle unless they offer ludicrous amounts of money. I think he's a very valuable player for anyone who signs him, and I just really hate the fact that Arsenal haven't used him this season and prefer and Arteta moved him on from David Raya. I just don't like it, and I admired David Raya for what he's done with Blackburn and Southport, but I just think Ramsdale is he's a very good goalkeeper, and whoever gets him will benefit from him a lot, not only on the pitch but off it as well. Obviously, Calvin Phillips will probably move on. Apparently, Juventus are looking to sign him in on loan. But the player I'm going to focus on is Sergio Gomez, who they signed from Anderlecht, and he just hasn't featured. Guardiola has preferred his 4 centre-backs, in the back 4. And with that, I just don't think there's going to be a future for Sergio Gomez. I think just move back to Spain, where he had success at Huesca. And, he did really well at Anderlecht, so somewhere where they have flying wing-backs, or he's able to be free on the left-hand side. He is a very good player. He's a talented player, but maybe not at Manchester City's level. I think Bertrand Traore should move on. He was important to help Villa rescue their Conference League spots last season. I think he got 2 last-minute goals last season to help them. And I think he just needs to move on. So, former Lyon, Ajax, Vitesse player, I think just as a winger, he's talented enough, so potentially move to Turkey or back to France. He is a good player, and while they're a lot of clubs won't look at him because of AFCON, I think he'd just be a good player. And last of his current table toppers, Liverpool, who for me probably it would be Kiefer Kelleher, who would probably move on. He's a solid number 2, but I think his form in his recent fixtures has kind of maybe have people concerned. So I'm going to pick Connor Bradley. While he has had injuries, he is a very good right back. I think he was Bolton's player of the season last year in League One, and they were just really unfortunate not to go up. And of course he's had an injury at the start of the season, but I just don't imagine him getting any game time with Trent there. And with how Liverpool play, it's not as if Trent's going to move into the midfield. He will stick as right back per se, but there won't be a spot for Bradley to kind of slot in. So I think just for his career, Northern Ireland international, he's very good. He's very good going forward, solid going back. I think just move him on, and I could see a high tier Championship club or a lower tier Premier League club taking a punt on him and him, prospering in that, in those sides. He is a very talented right back, and I think he could do something for our team. Liverpool should keep him in terms of his talent and his quality, but if he's not going to get ahead of Trent, sell him now to get to his maximum value. So what do you guys think of my list? I know there's a lot of players I missed out on, but as I said earlier in the video, put it down in the comments and so I can see kind of who do you think should move on from the clubs, and try to pick ones that like I've tried to do a bit of research on all these players and kind of the amount of game time and what the perspective is of teams. But I'd love to know what you know, because I don't know what the ins of other clubs are. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, take care.